The sun hung low in the dusty sky, casting long shadows across the frontier town. The saloon at the edge of town, a crude, weathered building with swinging doors that creaked with every gust of wind, stood as a monument to lawlessness. Inside, the air was thick with smoke, the smell of whiskey, sweat, and desperation mingling in a suffocating haze. It was here that 5 young women, brought from distant towns through the promise of marriage, were being held against their will, sold, off as if they were property rather than people. Each woman carried a story, a life interrupted by circumstance or poverty. Yet now they were trapped in a situation that stripped them of any sense of freedom or dignity. The saloon's patrons, a rough assortment of cowboys, drifters, and opportunists, crowded around a makeshift auction stage. The barkeep, grinning with the satisfaction of a predator, called out prices, exaggerating virtues and glossing over the women's fear. The women stood nervously, their eyes scanning for a way out, their hands trembling slightly as they clutched the skirts of their worn dresses. The room was filled with laughter that rang hollow against the undercurrent of tension. Whispers of rebellion and escape flickered among the women, but no one dared act. They were outnumbered and outgunned. Meanwhile, beyond the town's borders, a solitary figure rode across the plains. The rancher, a man who had spent years tending to his isolated land, had heard rumors of the saloon's latest atrocity from a passing trader. The news unsettled him, sparking a restless energy he hadn't felt in years. He was a man shaped by solitude, rugged and silent, but his moral compass was unyielding. The thought of innocent lives being trampled by greed stirred something deep within him. He tightened his grip on the reins, eyes narrowing as he considered the risk. To ride into town alone, against a gang of men who thought they ruled by intimidation, was dangerous. Yet the injustice gnawed at him, and he knew he could not turn away. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, the rancher approached the town. The saloon's doors swayed in the warm breeze, almost as if anticipating the storm about to break inside. Patrons glanced up at the solitary figure on horseback, noting the steely determination in his posture. Inside, the women continued to endure the auction, unaware that hope had arrived in the form of this unlikely hero. The tension in the room was palpable. It was a fragile bubble, ready to burst. With a sudden burst of energy, the rancher kicked opened the saloon doors. The force sent them swinging violently, startling everyone inside. Dust and sunlight streamed into the room, illuminating the faces of the women and freezing the saloon's patrons mid-motion. A hush fell over the crowd, broken only by the rancher's commanding voice as he demanded the women's freedom. The women, initially shocked, felt a flicker of relief and disbelief. Someone had come for them, someone willing to challenge the tyranny of this saloon. In that moment, Part 1 sets the stage, the stark contrast between captivity and freedom, fear and courage, isolation and intervention. It introduces the saloon as a symbol of corruption, the women as victims with untapped strength, and the rancher as a lone force of justice, ready to alter the course of their lives forever. The tension is high, the stakes are clear, and the Defy story begins its journey toward rebellion, rescue, and the forging of unexpected bonds. The moment the saloon doors slammed open, a gust of wind swept through the room, carrying dust and the scent of the prairie into the dimly lit interior. The patrons froze, mid-drink, mid-laugh, mid-bid, as if time itself had hesitated. All eyes turned to the lone figure in the doorway. A man on horseback, hat low, eyes sharp and unwavering, and the unmistakable aura of someone who refused to be trifled with. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then the barkeep barked a startled laugh. "Well, who do we have here?" His voice was heavy with mockery, but the tremor beneath it betrayed his unease. The rancher dismounted with quiet precision, boots hitting the wooden floor with authority. "Let them go," he said, his voice low but firm, carrying a weight that made even the rowdiest of men pause. All 5 of them, now. The women, huddled near the corner of the saloon, exchanged glances that spoke volumes. Fear, hope, and disbelief mingled in their eyes. They had witnessed countless patrons leer, bid, and whisper threats. But this man, this stranger, radiated something different. Someone who meant it. Their hearts quickened as they realized that rescue was not just a dream anymore. It was real, and standing right in front of them. A few of the rougher men at the bar stepped forward, hands hovering, near their holsters. "You think you can just waltz in here and tell us what to do?" one snarled. Laughter erupted from some of the other patrons, but it was nervous laughter, punctuated by the occasional shuffling of boots. The rancher didn't flinch. He had faced storms, wild animals, and desperate men before. These men, motivated by greed, rather than skill, were no match. The first man lunged forward, brandishing a knife, but the rancher was quicker. A swift movement, a precise block, and the knife clattered harmlessly to the floor. The saloon erupted into chaos. Chairs overturned, bottles shattered, and shouts filled the smoky air. Yet, amidst the chaos, the rancher's eyes never left the 5 women. He positioned himself between them and the danger, a silent promise that no harm would come to them while he was there. The women, seeing the opportunity, began to move cautiously toward him. One of them, the youngest, nearly tripped over a fallen chair, but the rancher caught her by the elbow, steadying her. "It's all right," he said, giving her a reassuring nod. "Stay close." Her lips trembled with gratitude, and a spark of courage ignited within her. Meanwhile, the barkeep tried to regain control. "You can't just take them," he shouted. "They're—" He stopped mid-sentence as the rancher stepped forward, moving with a predator's calm and the authority of a man who had nothing to fear. His presence alone caused hesitation, and for a moment the patrons froze, uncertainty etched on their faces. The rancher's strategy was simple but effective. He kept the focus on the women, the moral weight of the situation, and the inevitability of his resolve. Slowly the crowd began to scatter, realizing the odds were no longer in their favor. The women, emboldened by the rancher's courage, followed his lead, moving toward the door that now symbolized hope. Outside, the night was cool and welcoming. The stars stretched endlessly above the plains, a stark contrast to the confined terror of the saloon. The rancher led the women to his horse, helping them climb carefully before he mounted behind them. They didn't speak much, words felt unnecessary, but the relief in their eyes said everything. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, they felt safe. As they rode away, the saloon behind them slowly quieted, the echoes of chaos fading into the night. The rancher glanced at the women, noting the mix of fear and fragile hope in their expressions. He knew the journey ahead would be dangerous. The saloon owner and his men would not forget this humiliation. But for now, they were free, and that was what mattered most. Part 2 establishes the first real confrontation, showcases the rancher's courage and skill, and begins the formation of trust between him and the women. The tension of immediate danger is paired with the emotional relief of escape, setting the stage for the journey to the ranch. The moon hung low over the prairie, casting a silvery light across the rolling hills. The rancher rode steadily, leading the group of 5 women through the quiet night. Each was mounted behind him on one of his 2 strong horses, the weight of fear and exhaustion still clinging to them. Silence reigned at first, broken only by the soft clop of hooves against the hard earth and the whisper of wind through the sparse trees. The women were still processing what had just happened. The sudden rescue, the chaos of the saloon, and the shocking audacity of the lone man who had saved them. Slowly, the youngest of the women spoke, her voice tentative. "Sir, why did you do it? Why risk yourself for us?" Her words hung in the cool night air, carrying a mixture of curiosity, gratitude, and disbelief. The rancher, keeping his gaze fixed on the path ahead, gave a small, almost reluctant shrug. "Someone had to," he said simply. No one should be treated like that. His words were calm, yet heavy with the weight of unspoken memories, hinting at experiences that had shaped him into the man he was. Another woman, the one who had been the most defiant in the saloon, finally spoke. "You could have been killed back there. Do you know how reckless that was?" The rancher didn't flinch. "I've faced worse," he replied, "and I've learned that sometimes doing the right thing isn't safe." The words were straightforward, almost blunt, but they carried a conviction that made the women feel a strange sense of safety. As the ride continued, small fragments of conversation began to emerge. The women shared bits of their lives, how they had come to answer the mail-order ads, their hopes for new beginnings, and the disappointment that had led them into the hands of the saloon's predators. Each story painted a picture of resilience and quiet strength. Though they were strangers to one another, and even more strangers to the man guiding them, a bond was beginning to form, a fragile trust stitched together by shared fear and the hope of freedom. The rancher listened more than he spoke, occasionally asking a question here and there, his deep voice steady and reassuring. His presence was calming, a steady anchor in a world that had been spinning out of control for these women. The horses trotted steadily, muscles rippling beneath their sleek hides, carrying the group through the darkness toward the distant lights of the ranch that promised shelter and safety. But the night was not entirely peaceful. The distant howl of coyotes reminded them that the wilderness was as dangerous as any human threat. The rancher remained alert, scanning the horizon and listening for unusual sounds. He knew that word of the audacious rescue would reach the saloon owner soon. Revenge was inevitable, and he had to be prepared. Still, for now, the urgency of the moment allowed a rare quiet to settle over the group. One of the older women with silver streaks in her dark hair leaned slightly forward, her hands clutching the reins tightly. Do you always ride alone?" she asked, curiosity mingled with caution. The rancher chuckled softly, a sound so low and unexpected that it startled the others. "Not always," he said, "but it's simpler this way, fewer complications, until tonight, that is." The comment drew a small, tentative laugh from the women, a sound that felt almost foreign after days of fear and tension. As the first hints of dawn touched the horizon, the rancher spotted the faint outline of his homestead, a modest, sturdy ranch house surrounded by fences, corrals, and the rolling plains he had come to call home. Relief flickered across the women's faces, the promise of safety, of shelter, and of a reprieve from the horrors they had endured seemed tangible for the first time. The rancher guided them carefully through the final stretch, ensuring that no one faltered, and that the horses remained calm under the weight of their precious cargo. By the time they arrived, the sun was rising, bathing the prairie in soft gold. The women dismounted, legs shaky but hearts buoyed by a cautious optimism. The rancher helped them down, one by one, and led them inside the sturdy house. Though modest, it was clean, warm, and welcoming, a stark contrast to the darkness and corruption of the saloon. For the first time since their arrival in the town, the women felt a flicker of hope. Part 3 deepens the emotional connection between the rancher and the women, introduces the first hints of their backstories, and establishes the journey to the ranch as a transitional moment, both a literal escape and the beginning of a psychological journey toward trust, safety, and self-discovery. The story balances relief with lingering tension, foreshadowing dangers yet to come. The ranch house was modest but solid, a refuge built from weathered timber and rough-hewn stone, perched on a small rise that overlooked the rolling prairie. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke, leather, and the faint scent of hay from the nearby stables. The women hesitated at the threshold, their boots kicking up dust from the porch, unsure of what to expect. For weeks, they had known nothing but fear, betrayal, and the harsh judgment of strangers. Now, in this quiet sanctuary, they felt something unfamiliar. Safety. The rancher gestured toward the main room. "You can rest here," he said. "There's food in the kitchen, and you'll find blankets on the beds. I'll make sure you're safe tonight." His tone was firm but gentle, carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command, tempered by a rare, careful kindness. The women nodded silently, their eyes scanning the room, taking in the simple furnishings, sturdy wooden chairs, a large table, and a hearth that glowed faintly, promising warmth against the cool morning air. Once inside, the women began to move cautiously, each exploring the space in small, tentative steps. The youngest lingered near the hearth, drawing the warmth into her chilled bones, while another moved toward the window, gazing out over the vast expanse of prairie, her mind already imagining freedom beyond the horizon. Their expressions were a mixture of relief and lingering distrust, for though the saloon was behind them, the memory of its cruelty lingered in their minds. The rancher watched them quietly, allowing them space while keeping a careful eye on their reactions. He knew that trust was fragile, especially for women who had been manipulated and threatened repeatedly. No words could erase the fear they carried. They would need time, patience, and steady proof that his intentions were genuine. He had rescued them, yes, but now came the harder part, helping them believe they were truly safe. After a moment, he cleared his throat. "Eat something," he said, pointing toward a pot of stew simmering over the hearth. "You need your strength." Hesitantly, the women moved toward the food. Their hands trembled as they picked up bowls, and for a brief instant, silence fell over the room, an unspoken acknowledgement of vulnerability. The rancher didn't rush them. He simply stood by, letting them reclaim some small measure of dignity through a basic act of nourishment. As they ate, fragments of conversation began to surface. The silver-haired woman, who had seemed the most cautious, spoke first. "It's different here," she said softly. "Quiet. Safe. I can hardly believe it." The rancher nodded. "It's as close to safe as this world gets," he replied. "But we must remain vigilant. There are people who won't take kindly to what happened at the saloon." His words reminded them that danger was not entirely behind them, and yet there was reassurance in his presence. Evening came, and the women were guided to simple, separate rooms, each furnished with a sturdy bed and a warm blanket. For some, the night was restless, filled with dreams of captivity and the faces of those who had wronged them. For others, it was the first sleep in weeks, free from immediate terror. The rancher patrolled the perimeter, making sure the stables were secure and that the horses were ready should they need to flee. The night was calm, but he knew that peace was always temporary in the frontier. By the following morning, the women began to emerge from their rooms, tentative but curious. Some lingered near the porch, watching the sunrise over the open plains, while others helped with simple chores, guided gently by the rancher. Small acts, a sweeping of the floor, feeding. The horses, preparing breakfast, became acts of reclaiming independence. Slowly, the women began to see themselves not merely as victims, but as capable individuals, and the rancher as more than just a savior, as someone who would support them without judgment or expectation. Part 4 establishes the ranch as a safe haven, emphasizes the women's gradual reclamation of agency, and deepens their emotional connection with the rancher. The story balances relief and growing trust with the underlying tension that threats from the saloon or other dangers remain imminent. This chapter lays the foundation for character development, moral choices, and the challenges that lie ahead on the path toward freedom. The sun rose higher over the prairie, warming the ranch and illuminating the vast, open landscape. The women had begun to settle into a tentative routine, moving with cautious curiosity around the property. Some tended to the animals, others gathered firewood or helped in the small garden. Each task, though simple, was an act of reclamation, an opportunity to take back control over lives that had been dictated by others for far too long. the rancher observed quietly, offering guidance when necessary, but allowing them the dignity of independence. But even in this newfound peace, tension lingered. The rancher knew that the events at the saloon had made him an enemy. The owner and his men would not forget the humiliation of being outwitted and defeated. The question was not if they would return, but when. The threat of retaliation hung over the ranch like a storm cloud, unseen yet undeniable. It was the eldest of the women who first noticed it, a subtle movement on the horizon. "Someone's watching," she said quietly, her voice tight with fear. The rancher paused mid-task, eyes narrowing as he scanned the distant hills. A faint dust trail marked the approach of horses, too far to see clearly, but close enough to recognize that they were not wandering travelers. He didn't panic, but he acted decisively. "Stay inside," he instructed. "Don't make a sound. Lock the doors. If they come closer, we'll be ready." The women complied, their hearts hammering, hands fumbling with locks and latches. For the first time, fear mingled with determination. These were no longer helpless captives. They were now participants in their own defense. The rancher gathered his weapons and positioned himself strategically near the main gate. Every instinct honed by years on the frontier was at work. Was prepared for confrontation, but he was also calculating, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As the riders drew closer, it became clear that there were 5 of them, mounted and heavily armed, faces hidden beneath wide-brimmed hats. The leader, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, spat on the ground. "You think you can steal what's ours?" he called. His voice carried across the prairie, rough and taunting. The rancher's jaw tightened, but he remained calm. "They are not yours," he shouted back, "and you won't take them." The standoff was tense. Dust swirled between the two groups, horses pawing at the earth, nostrils flaring. The women watched from the safety of the house, a mix of fear and awe in their eyes. Then the first rider charged, but the rancher was ready. A single shot rang out, cutting the lead horse's path and forcing the rider to veer. Chaos erupted as the remaining men tried to follow, but the rancher's knowledge of the terrain gave him the advantage. He used the fences, gates, and narrow paths to create obstacles, separating the attackers and neutralizing their momentum. In the midst of the action, the women took their first active steps in their defense. One grabbed a lantern, using the swinging light to disorient a rider who was approaching the house. Another picked up a sturdy broom, standing ready to fend off anyone who came too close. Each action, though small, was a declaration. They were no longer helpless. They had been given the chance to fight back, and they would not waste it. After a tense half-hour, the attackers retreated, leaving the ranch and its inhabitants intact. The women exhaled in unison, relief washing over them, but also a newfound confidence. They had faced danger, witnessed the courage of the rancher firsthand, and begun to understand that strength could be found in unexpected places, even within themselves. That night, around the hearth, the women shared their feelings, a mixture of fear, exhilaration, and gratitude. The rancher listened, offering reassurance without judgment. He knew this was only the beginning. Life on the frontier would continue to test them, but tonight marked a turning point. They were no longer simply rescued. They were beginning to take ownership of their own destiny. Part 5 introduces active conflict from the outside, demonstrates the women taking part in their own defense, and emphasizes the growing bond and trust between them and the rancher. It highlights courage, resourcefulness, and the harsh realities of frontier justice, setting the stage for further trials and the development of resilience and teamwork. The morning after the skirmish broke over the prairie like a fragile promise. Sunlight spilled across the ranch, illuminating the land in soft gold, but the memory of last night's confrontation lingered in the rancher's mind. He moved with purpose, checking the fences, inspecting the stables, and scanning the horizon for any sign of the returning men. He knew that victory today did not guarantee safety tomorrow, Inside the house, the 5 women stirred with a mixture of cautious optimism and lingering anxiety. Their first night of relative safety had bolstered their spirits, yet they were beginning to understand that freedom was never truly secure on the frontier. The rancher gathered them in the main room, speaking with the calm authority of someone accustomed to difficult decisions. "We need a plan," he said. "You can't just hide and hope they won't come back. We have to be prepared, for them, and for anything else this land might throw at us." The women listened intently, their faces a mix of determination and apprehension. It was the silver-haired woman who spoke first. "We've never had to defend ourselves before," she said, her voice steady but laced with honesty. "But we can learn." The rancher nodded, recognizing the importance of that moment. It wasn't just about survival, it was about empowerment, reclaiming agency that had long been denied. Over the next several days, the rancher began to train the women in basic survival skills. They learned how to handle firearms safely, how to ride with confidence across rough terrain, and how to spot threats from a distance. They practiced moving quietly, setting simple alarms around the property, and using the land to their advantage. Each lesson was a small victory, a reclaiming of control over their own lives. Slowly, their fear gave way to a quiet strength, tempered by awareness and careful judgment. But it wasn't all drills and preparation. The rancher also taught them to tend the land, care for the animals, and manage the ranch's daily routines. The work was hard, yet fulfilling. Each act of labor became a symbol of self-reliance, a way to prove to themselves that they could endure and thrive. The bond between the rancher and the women deepened, built not only on gratitude but on mutual respect. They began to see him not merely as a savior, but as a partner in creating a new life, one defined by safety, dignity, and purpose. Evenings were spent around the hearth, sharing stories of their pasts, their dreams, and their hopes for the future. Laughter began to emerge, fragile but genuine, a sound that had been absent for far too long. The rancher would listen quietly, occasionally offering a word of advice or encouragement. The women's confidence grew with each passing day, and so did their sense of belonging. For the first time, they began to believe that they were more than the sum of their fears. Yet, the rancher never allowed complacency. He reminded them that the saloon owner and his men were still out there, that danger could return at any moment. Preparation was ongoing, vigilance constant. The women accepted this reality, understanding that freedom on the frontier required courage, skill, and unity. Their fear had transformed into determination, their despair into resilience. One afternoon, while checking the perimeter, the rancher paused, watching the women work together to repair a fence. Their movements were coordinated, confident, and careful. He allowed himself a small, rare smile. They had come far in a short time, and he knew that whatever trials lay ahead, they would face them together. Part 6 emphasizes preparation, skill building, and empowerment. It highlights the evolution of trust, independence, and resilience among the women while showing the rancher's steady leadership. The story moves from mere survival to proactive defense and community building, setting the stage for deeper character growth. Weeks passed on the ranch, and a rhythm began to settle into daily life. The prairie sun rose and fell over fields of golden grass, the wind whispering through the fences and rolling hills. The women moved with increasing confidence, each finding a role that suited her strengths. Some tended the animals, others worked in the garden or the house, but all shared a quiet determination to reclaim the lives that had once been stolen from them. The rancher watched them carefully, noting their growth, proud yet cautious, aware that the peace they enjoyed was always fragile. Amid the routines of survival and labor, the women began to forge bonds with one another. Shared experience had created trust, and small acts of kindness, helping a horse stumble back to its feet, guiding another across uneven terrain, sparked moments of connection. They laughed more freely now, a sound that filled the ranch with warmth and life. Even the youngest, who had clung to fear so tightly in the saloon, began to smile without hesitation. Slowly, the ranch house began to feel like a home rather than a refuge, a place where hope could grow. The rancher, too, felt the subtle changes within himself. The women's resilience and courage inspired him, and he realized that his solitude had left a void he hadn't understood until now. He found himself sharing small stories from his past, moments of loss or quiet triumph, creating a fragile but genuine connection. Trust was no longer one-sided. The women began to see him as a companion, not just a protector. Glances lingered, a bit longer, smiles carried warmth, and the atmosphere subtly shifted from simple survival to a shared life on the frontier. But the shadow of the saloon's gang never fully dissipated. One evening, a dust trail appeared on the horizon, and the rancher's senses sharpened immediately. The women, now attuned to the land and alert to danger, noticed it too. "They're back," the eldest woman murmured, tension tightening her shoulders. The rancher nodded. "Possibly, but we're ready. We've grown stronger. We won't be caught off guard." Preparations became meticulous. Fences were reinforced, lookout posts were established, and the women rehearsed strategies for defense. Their training, once a set of lessons, had evolved into instinct. Each of them now carried a quiet confidence, a knowledge that they could act decisively if needed. They were no longer mere victims, they were partners in their own protection. During the long evenings, around the hearth or sitting beneath the stars, subtle bonds began to form between the rancher and the women beyond trust and survival. There were moments of shared laughter, playful teasing, and glances that lingered a second too long. The youngest woman, her eyes wide with curiosity, would ask about the rancher's life before the ranch, drawing out stories he hadn't told anyone for years. Another, more reserved, watched him work quietly, noticing the gentleness in his actions with animals and the land. Though none spoke directly of it, there was an unspoken sense of connection growing between them, one built on admiration, respect, and the shared experience of facing danger together. Amid this growing warmth, a quiet evening revealed another subtle shift. The women, seated together after supper, laughed softly at a story the rancher recounted, and he caught himself glancing at them with a protective pride that went beyond mere guardianship. They, in turn, were beginning to see him as someone who could be trusted, not just for safety, but for companionship, someone who might offer a future different from the harsh world outside the ranch. Yet, life on the frontier remained unpredictable. The tension of possible attacks, harsh weather, and the demands of survival lingered, reminding all that their peace was hard-won and precious. The rancher and the women had grown stronger, individually and collectively, but the world outside their fences still posed threats. Part 7 deepens emotional development, showing the women forming friendships and trust, while hinting at affection or admiration for the rancher. It balances the warmth of newfound bonds with the ever-present tension of external danger, creating a foundation for both personal growth and rising conflict. The horizon was streaked with the orange and purple of an early sunset when the first warning came. A distant rider, moving faster than the grazing winds, kicked up dust that shimmered in the fading light. The rancher's hand went instinctively to his revolver, his eyes narrowing as he gauged the approach. "They're coming," he said calmly but with an edge of urgency. The women, now seasoned by weeks of training, immediately sprang into action. Locks were checked, gates secured, and the lookout post manned. This was the first test of their abilities since establishing trust and routine, and each woman knew that failure was not an option. The riders broke through the distant ridge, a group of 6 men, more heavily armed than the last, their faces hard with vengeance. The rancher counted them quickly, assessing their strength, their formation, and the terrain. "Stay inside unless I call you," he instructed. "We'll draw them in where we have the advantage." The women nodded, tension coiled in their muscles, yet their eyes betrayed confidence born of preparation and experience. As the attackers approached the perimeter, the rancher guided them toward a narrow corridor formed by fences and the natural slope of the land. The horses whinnied and pawed at the earth, dust rising in clouds as the first shots rang out. The rancher's aim was precise, forcing one rider to swerve dangerously and drop his weapon. The others hesitated, caught off guard by both the skill and strategy of the rancher, who used the terrain as both shield and weapon. Inside the house, the women moved like shadows, positioning themselves behind reinforced doors and windows. The youngest, clutching her rifle, took careful aim under the rancher's instruction. Another, her hands steady on the hearth, prepared to hurl a lantern if the attackers attempted a breach. Their actions were deliberate, a testament to the lessons learned and their growing courage. They were no longer passive. They were participants, integral to the defense of the ranch. The skirmish intensified as one of the riders dismounted, attempting to flank the rancher and gain a vantage point near the house. The silver-haired woman reacted instinctively, stepping out from behind cover to alert the rancher and disrupt the attacker's movement. The rancher returned fire with precision, while the other women provided support by closing gates and creating obstacles. Dust and smoke swirled in the fading light, a chaotic ballet of skill, strategy, and courage. Despite their fear, the women remained focused. Every action reflected lessons learned, every movement deliberate. The rancher, observing them, felt a surge of pride and relief. These women had transformed from terrified captives into capable defenders, able to hold their own in a confrontation that would have terrified them weeks before. Their bond, forged through shared struggle and trust, was evident in the way they moved in tandem, anticipating each other's needs and actions. After what felt like hours, though only minutes had passed, the attackers were forced to retreat. The horses bolted, dust clouds rising as the men disappeared over the ridge, leaving the ranch and its inhabitants intact. The rancher lowered his weapon, breathing heavily, and the women exhaled in unison, the tension leaving their bodies in waves. Relief and exhilaration mixed with newfound confidence. That night, under a sky awash with stars, the women and rancher gathered outside the house. They shared a quiet meal and reflected on the day's events. Laughter and soft conversation returned, but it was tempered with the knowledge that danger would always lurk on the frontier. Yet, in that moment, there was also pride in their skill, their courage, and their unity. They were no longer helpless, and the ranch had become more than a refuge. It was a place where they could fight, survive, and even thrive. Part 8 raises the stakes with an intense external threat, showcasing the women's growth in skill and confidence, while highlighting the rancher's leadership and tactical brilliance. It balances action with emotional reward, reinforcing trust, unity, and the morning after the skirmish broke over the prairie in a quiet, deceptive calm. The rancher moved along the fences and outbuildings, inspecting for damage. Though the attackers had been forced to retreat, they had left signs of their passage. Trampled fences, scattered tools, and hoof prints etched deep into the soft earth. The rancher's eyes narrowed. They would return, and when they did, it would be with more determination. Inside the house, the women were already awake, each performing small chores to restore order and repair the minor damage. The youngest swept the porch, her movements now deliberate and confident, while the silver-haired woman repaired a torn feed sack, her hands steady despite the adrenaline of the previous day. Their work was methodical, but there was a subtle energy that hadn't been there before. A sense of ownership, a quiet defiance born of experience and courage. The rancher called them together in the main room. "They will return," he said, plainly, his tone calm but resolute. "We need a plan that ensures this doesn't happen again." The women nodded, their eyes meeting his with a mix of determination and trust. They had come a long way from the frightened captives they had been weeks ago. Now, they were active participants in the defense of their lives and their home. Over the next few days, they worked together to fortify the ranch. The women learned to set traps and alarms around the perimeter, reinforcing gates and securing the outbuildings. They moved with quiet precision, their confidence growing with every task completed. Even in moments of danger, they had discovered strength they didn't know existed. The rancher guided them, but the initiative had begun to shift. They were learning to anticipate threats and act decisively. Amid the preparations, moments of personal connection deepened. The women shared stories of their pasts around the hearth, speaking of hopes once dashed and dreams now cautiously renewed. The rancher, in turn, opened up about the hardships he had faced in isolation, the losses, the loneliness, the quiet struggles that had shaped him. These exchanges, tender and honest, created bonds that went beyond necessity or gratitude. They were forming a makeshift family, united by shared experience and mutual respect. Tension lingered in the air despite these small comforts. One afternoon, while scouting the perimeter, the rancher spotted another rider approaching, a lone figure, moving cautiously. He signaled to the women, and they retreated to secure positions, alert but calm. The rider was not an attacker. It was a messenger from a neighboring ranch, bringing word that the saloon owner had gathered reinforcements and was planning a larger assault. The reality of ongoing danger was undeniable, but the women met the news with determination rather than panic. That evening, they gathered around the hearth once more. The rancher addressed them with quiet authority. "We can't ignore what's coming," he said, "but we have grown stronger. We know this land, we know each other, and we know what we're capable of. If they come, we'll be ready." There was a shared understanding in the room. Fear remained, but it was tempered by courage, experience, and unity. The women, now confident in their abilities, discussed strategy openly. Their voices carried ideas, observations, and suggestions for fortifying the ranch. The rancher listened, weighing their input and offering guidance. The partnership had matured. It was no longer a one-sided effort. Each woman had become a guardian of their home, capable of taking action, anticipating threats, and protecting not only herself, but the others. By nightfall, a sense of quiet resilience settled over the ranch. The firelight flickered across determined faces, reflecting hope and courage. The prairie outside was still and calm, but beneath the surface, everyone knew that challenges would continue. Yet they were ready. Together they had grown into a formidable force, bound not just by circumstance, but by trust, courage, and a shared commitment to survival. Part 9 reinforces the ongoing threat while emphasizing the women's transformation into proactive, skilled defenders. It strengthens the emotional bonds among the characters, showcasing unity, trust, and resilience, setting the stage for the climactic resolution in Part 10. The first light of dawn painted the prairie in soft pinks and golds. A tense calm hung over the ranch. The rancher had sensed it all night. An unspoken promise of confrontation, the inevitability of the saloon owner's return. But this time, the ranch and its inhabitants were ready. The women, now seasoned defenders, had sharpened their skills, fortified the ranch, and prepared themselves for whatever danger came. The distant thunder of hooves heralded the arrival of the attackers. This time, a larger group charged across the plains, faces masked with determination and anger. The rancher stood at the forefront, revolver in hand, eyes scanning for weaknesses in their formation. The women took positions behind fences, doors, and the natural features of the land, their expressions calm, focused, and resolute. Gone was the fear that had once defined them. In its place was courage forged in trials, and unity strengthened by shared struggle. The attackers surged forward, but the rancher's strategy was flawless. Using the terrain, he funneled them into narrow corridors where the horses had little room to maneuver. Shots rang out, echoes bouncing across the prairie, and one by one, the attackers were forced to retreat or surrender. The women played their part with precision. The youngest, her hands steady, took careful aim, while another hurled a lantern to create confusion among the intruders. Their actions were no longer reactive. They were deliberate, strategic, and coordinated, a true partnership with the rancher. Midway through the confrontation, the saloon owner himself emerged, riding aggressively toward the house. The rancher met him with unwavering determination. A tense standoff followed, words exchanged only to mark the lines of battle. Then, with precise aim, the rancher disarmed him, forcing him to surrender. The remaining attackers, seeing their leader defeated, scattered across the prairie, leaving the ranch in victorious silence. As the dust settled, the women approached the rancher, relief and exhilaration shining on their faces. They had faced danger, defended themselves, and emerged stronger. The rancher looked at each of them, pride and admiration reflected in his eyes. "You did well," he said quietly, "all of you." For the first time, they understood the depth of his respect. It was not pity, not gratitude alone, but recognition of their courage, skill, and transformation. In the days that followed, the ranch returned to a quiet rhythm, but now it was different. The sense of fear had been replaced with confidence, the shadows of the past replaced with the light of possibility. The women took an active role in managing the ranch, tending the animals, repairing fences, and maintaining their home. Their laughter, once hesitant, rang freely through the rooms and across the prairie, mingling with the rancher's own quiet chuckles. Beyond practical routines, the bonds among them deepened. Shared trials had turned into trust, respect, and even the beginnings of affection. The rancher found himself drawn to each woman, not just as a protector, but as a companion and partner. In return, they saw in him not just strength and courage, but kindness, patience, and integrity. Together, they had forged a makeshift family, united by adversity and shared triumph. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the rancher and the women stood on the porch, looking out over the rolling hills. The air was warm, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers and hay. One of the women, the silver-haired elder, spoke softly. "We're safe now, thanks to you." The rancher shook his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. "No, you're safe because you fought, because you trusted yourselves. I only helped guide the way." The other women nodded, understanding the truth in his words. Their freedom, their safety, and their newfound strength were theirs, earned through courage, unity, and resilience. And yet, the rancher was inseparable from their journey, the steady presence that had made hope tangible when it seemed impossible. As night fell over the prairie, the ranch glowed with a quiet warmth. Inside, the women shared stories and laughter, while outside, the rancher tended the animals and prepared for another day. They were no longer captives, no longer dependent solely on one man's bravery. Together, they had created something enduring, a home, a sanctuary, and a community built on trust, courage, and love. The story closed not with the end of danger, but with the triumph of resilience, the strength of unity, and the promise of a future forged by their choices. The lonely rancher was no longer lonely. The women were no longer afraid, and the prairie stretched endlessly before them, full of